Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the January User Group, our first one for the year. Delighted to have you with us. We've got quite a few things to get through today. We'll be focusing largely on the campaign canvas. It's pretty clear from some of the discussions we've had with some newer customers and certainly even long-term customers that taking a deeper dive and at least understanding the basics at the same time of the campaign canvas is critical. So that's today's agenda. Let's get started and we'll make a move. So there are three key areas that we want to focus on today. One is to give you a bit of an overview and introduction to the campaign canvas, but at the same time explore some best practice tips and ideas. Certainly templates is a great place to start. Templates are critical with the campaign canvas. If you find you're building campaigns and arriving at the campaign canvas with a blank canvas, then we're doing something wrong. So let's have a look at some of the ways you can build out some basic templates that will certainly speed that process for you in the execution of your campaigns. The next step is to look at the four key areas that make up the campaign canvas, which are your audience, your assets, the decisions that you make based on people's behavior, and then the actions. What do you really need to do following those things? So we'll walk you through those, help you understand what they mean in a little bit more detail, and then also looking at why you need to understand the campaign entry and exit concept. That ties in fairly closely with the campaign start and end date as well. So we'll have a look at that and explain what that means, and then provide you with a little bit of an update on some of the aspects of the recent update that's underway as we speak. But let's get started. So what is Eloqua? Well, it's certainly a cross-channel marketing platform, but sometimes it's a little bit easier to describe what it isn't versus what it is. And probably the easiest way to describe that really Eloqua is much more than just email marketing. Email marketing gives typically the experience of where you have a list, you have an email, and you send it. And you may send it to 20 people, or you may send it to 20,000 or 20 million people. But that's not really marketing automation. It's just simply, well, I can't really call it spamming, I suppose, but it's possibly not much more. So we want to look at how marketing automation really makes a difference and how you do that with Eloqua. Some of you may have seen this diagram previously. It really just outlines some of the key areas and functions of the Eloqua platform. Now, as you can see, we certainly highlight one of those areas as being email marketing. And yes, Eloqua enables you to do that. Of course it does. But what we want to do is really take advantage of the campaign automation. And really, it's those two things combined that deliver a much smarter solution, definitely tied in with targeting and segmentation. So all of those aspects together, we believe, deliver you a marketing automation platform versus simply an email marketing platform. So let's dive straight in and have a look. So we'll go straight to the canvas now and have a little bit of a closer look at that. Now, there are a few key things that we really need to understand about the campaign canvas and the way Eloqua functions, and which then really describes or delivers the experience that you're trying to do. So let's take a close look. So one of the key messages I suppose we'd have from a best practice point of view is to really begin to consider what that experience is going to look like long before you actually log in and start building the canvas. So at that strategy stage, when you're beginning to think through the campaign and understand what the objectives are for the campaign, it's at that point that you want to start thinking, how does my campaign, or how does my marketing automation platform, Eloqua, really deliver that experience, and how can it really enhance the objectives of the campaign? If you make all of these decisions before contemplating marketing automation, then you get to the point where you're starting to build the campaign in Eloqua, and you begin to realize, well, actually, you know what, if we did this, we could potentially do this. And so it's much smarter to think a lot earlier than to leave it to the last minute. Now, there are some fundamentals to think about in relation to the campaign canvas, and this would be probably the basics, I suppose, or the 101 aspect of the campaign canvas. And that is that when a contact comes into a campaign, they effectively become known as a campaign member. And so a campaign member at one point will enter the campaign once and they will exit that campaign at some point. Now, the important point here is that they do that once. So a single contact can't be on a campaign canvas in multiple streams. So if you have 2 or 3 segments sitting on your campaign canvas, and one particular person is sitting in 2 or more of those segments, then they'll only get one email. Now, which email will they get? Well, that's up to Eloqua, actually. Eloqua does some pretty magical mathematics in the background and works out based on a priority as to which one it believes it should get. So the smart thing for you to do is to make sure as you build your various segments that you've got the right people in the right segments. Yeah, it's just something you need to manage and stay on top of. Now, the nice thing about that, though, is that what it does, it really restricts the ability of an individual to receive the same email more than once. So even if a campaign runs over a long period of time, somebody may meet the criteria in the future. However, they won't be able to, they may enter the campaign, but they won't be sent anything again. So they can't be sent the same email twice. Now, even if you have that email on a different campaign canvas 6 months later, same thing, the person cannot be sent that email a second time. So that's certainly critical to understand. And at the same time, should give you a degree of confidence that you're not going to send somebody the same message twice. Let's take a look at the actual canvas itself and understand a little bit more about what it is we want to look at today and to understand. So what we have here in front of you right now is a fairly simple campaign. It's quite basic. You can see there's a couple of segments there at the top of the screen. And so these segments make up the audience. One thing to understand too is, why is one grey and the other green? Well, the green one means that we've actually added the segment. So the actual contacts have been added to that segment on the right-hand side. You can see the number 13 shows there. So there are 13 people sitting in that particular segment. However, the one over here on the left is still grey. And now because it's grey, that tells you very clearly that the actual contacts have not been added to that particular segment. So that's a very quick visual. So if we take that same concept, you can see all of these other assets are also grey. However, this one down here has also been configured because it's not grey, so it's set to a right colour. When we start to move down through the left-hand side of the screen, you'll see we now reach the assets area of Eloqua, which are blue. And so this is where your emails are added, and also landing pages and forms. So where you might have a link sitting in an email that goes to a landing page that has a form on it, or it maybe just goes to a landing page, you'll see a little icon that pops up here in the right-hand corner of the email, and you can go ahead and add that to the canvas. And so these are your assets. The next area that we look at down the left-hand side of the campaign canvas are the decisions and the decision criteria. And so the decision criteria is really how you begin to interrogate the digital body language of the various people that you're engaging through this particular campaign. In this example, we've selected opened email as the question, and if the person hasn't opened that first email, then they're sent a second email that you can see here on the left-hand side. So the decision steps, which are all outlined here down on the left-hand side, enable you to interrogate a person's digital body language to a fairly minute amount of detail, which is kind of cool. So you can see if they've visited specific landing pages or web pages, if they've just visited the website more specifically or generally. That's done basically using a shared filter. You can also compare details on their contacts, so which state they're in, or their industry, or their job category, all those sorts of things. And based on that information, you may then send a person in a different direction. You'll notice also you can access custom objects as well. So custom objects typically relate to those folks who have a CRM attached to their instance of Eloqua, and those custom objects could be the opportunity object. They could be warranty information potentially that you've got contained in your CRM around products or services. All of these would be considered custom objects. Then the next area is actions, and now simply because the screen can't take everything, what I've done down there, you'll see that we've got the actions area just here on the bottom left-hand corner of the screen, and obviously that goes a little bit further down than that, but the action steps enable you to do something based on the decisions of the people involved in your campaign. So you might add them to campaigns, remove them from campaigns, add them to programs. The wait step is one of the more critical areas of Eloqua that is often forgotten. So all of those different aspects come together to deliver a unique customer experience, which should obviously be the objective. So over here on the right-hand side are the campaign settings. And campaign settings, when your campaign is not active or hasn't been saved, you'll notice this one hasn't been saved at this point. There are a range of options available. Once it's been saved, there's a third option that appears here, which is access to reporting. But here under campaign settings is where you can set the start date for your campaign, also an end date. I would typically encourage you to use a custom date. Generally speaking, most campaigns will have a start date and an end date. It's much smarter to go ahead and set those now than have to worry about deactivating campaigns later or remembering to do that, etc. So just choose a smart date now once you save your campaign, and that will be remembered. So just to give you a little bit of a tip, what I want to look at here is a little bit of a pop quiz. On this particular canvas that you can see in front of you, there's something that's missing, something that's glaringly missing. And I'm kind of curious to see who might understand and know what that is. Let me explain. So the key thing missing in this particular example of a campaign canvas is the wait step. So the wait step is super critical in this particular exercise. And so what the wait step does, it enables you to send your email. So you might send this email right here. Then you'll see later on we've got an opened email question. Now, if we don't have the wait step in place, the challenge is that the email is sent, and then a nanosecond later, we're asking the question, have they opened it? Now, in all reality, people probably would not even have received that email yet, or if they have, they probably haven't even looked at it yet. So what would happen then is it would be a negative, and everybody would then obviously flow off into the left-hand side down here. So everybody would receive that email, and that could happen within the space of 5 or 10 minutes. So the wait step, one of the common mistakes made by newer users to Eloqua, is critical. So remember, when you're asking questions, specifically opened email, clicked email, those sorts of things, and then delivering something following that experience, you must always ask, or not ask, but you must use the wait step. Allow people time to actually engage with your campaign. So the general rule there is that you probably want to have a wait step before a decision step. Let's have a closer look at the campaign canvas, and we'll get a little bit of a closer feel. What I'll do is I'll start off with one of those basic campaigns that you saw that I had there just a moment ago. Let me load that, and we'll jump in. Okay, so here you are at the campaign canvas in the flesh. So this is a template that we use quite often for a range of campaigns, often just those smaller campaigns that need to happen and sort of happen quickly and get out the door. So you can see there's our first email going to people, that magical wait step that we talked about, and also looking to see if people have opened that particular email. Now, something to consider also is how you finish off a campaign. Typically where you have a decision step that has a positive and a negative outcome, like this one that you can see right here in the middle of the screen, one of the key things you want to do is make sure you close off that campaign. Close off that particular element or step. It doesn't prevent the campaign from functioning. That's not a problem, but it does make reporting a little bit easier when you're able to look at the campaign entry and exit reports to know exactly where people left the campaign and have some order in relation to that. Some of the other areas of the campaign canvas you'll notice over here on the left-hand side, you've got all these other various options, and these stars begin to pop up. So these stars are essentially favorites. So if I unclick some of those favorites, for instance, and then minimize that menu, you'll see that the available options here reduce. So again, I can condense that a little bit further. There's little chevrons right there that you can click on to expand those menus. and expand them even further. And then if you want to restore those favorites, you can do so just by clicking on the stars there on the left-hand side of the screen. Now, some other tips that are nice if you're finding that you need to duplicate something or something you've created, you wanted to do it again, you can actually do that quite easily. You'll notice there what I can do is if I just click and drag my mouse over that entire area, it highlights each of those steps. I can then use my keyboard shortcuts to Control C and V. So Control C for copy and then Control V for paste. And so that becomes really helpful because I now have two of those streams. So depending on my campaign and the campaign objectives and the way I've laid out that particular canvas, that may be something that can help. It also holds the configuration. You'll notice that the segment number here remains at 13 and that segment is still attached. Now that obviously won't work because I can't have the same people in two segments, but that's not a problem. I can come in here, find my alternative segment, etc., and go ahead and make those changes. All right, let's jump back and have a look at our next step, which is a deep dive. And let's take a closer look now at the audience, assets, decisions, and actions, and just kind of giving you some tips on what is kind of critical and what you really need to know. One of the key things around the automation aspect of Eloqua comes into play with segments. And segments are really the beginning point or the entry point of your campaign, but they're not the only entry point for a campaign. The most common, but not the only ones. So people can enter a campaign from a form. So in a form processing step, you can use one of the processing steps called Add to Campaign. So that would enable someone following the submission of a form, potentially it's a white paper, might be part of a lead generation campaign that you're running. And so what you may want to do is to automatically have those people drop from the lead generation campaign potentially straight into a lead nurturing campaign. So you could use the Add to Campaign step from a form to show that. You may move people from one campaign to another, and Eloqua can do that automatically for you. There's no reason that you need to manually cut segments again based on behavior. You can just simply move contacts from one campaign canvas to another. That's a helpful step and certainly saves time. There are also a range of social plugins, specifically from LinkedIn and Facebook. So LinkedIn SlideShare and also the LinkedIn Lead Gen forms, that should be, I've just noticed, not the lead get, but the lead gen as in lead generation forms, and also the Facebook lead ads feeder. So those two particular functions, they're free. They're apps that you just need to add to your instance of Eloqua. Your Eloqua administrator can add those for you. What they enable you to do essentially is to allow people to see, you can make an offer that requires people to fill in a form, but it enables them to actually stay within the LinkedIn or Facebook environment. They don't need to leave those environments to then come to a landing page that you've created in order to fill in the form. And so essentially, once they fill in that form within the LinkedIn or Facebook environment, they continue on their merry way, doing what they're doing on LinkedIn or Facebook, but that information is captured and automatically sent directly through onto the campaign canvas within Eloqua. So from there, once they're sitting on the campaign canvas, well, you can do whatever you need to do. So whatever the offer is that you were providing, you can then use Eloqua to deliver on that particular promise. So a couple of things to understand in relation to this aspect of Eloqua and segments. You'll notice here on the screen what we've done is we've highlighted the segment, and by double clicking on the segment, that is that area at the very top of the screen, that icon that's sitting right here on the canvas. So by double clicking on that, you'll get this little pop-up window and a couple of things happen. So the first one, let me just zoom in a bit closer so you can see that a little bit easier. There are two options that are available to you. The first one, which is the default, which is to add members once when the campaign is first activated. The second option is to add members regularly until the campaign is deactivated. So what do these mean? Well, the first one, add members once when the campaign is activated, is exactly as it sounds. If you have 45,000 people sitting in your segment, that's it. game over. The campaign will be activated. Those 45,000 people will then flow through the campaign as you would expect them to do. The second option, however, ties in very closely with your campaign start date and end date. And so what you're able to do is add members regularly until the campaign is deactivated. Now, when you select that option, you need to then select the option below, which is the reevaluation frequency. And you can see that that's actually a drop-down menu. And from that drop-down menu, you're able to identify hours, days, weeks, or months. And so you assign the frequency, and that frequency then falls in place with the start and end date of your campaign. So if your campaign runs for 3 weeks, you may want to check once a day if anybody else meets the criteria within the database, and if they do, they then automatically flow into the campaign. Even if you're using an Excel spreadsheet to upload contacts into Eloqua, if you select this second option to add them regularly, that is the contacts, what that means is that, let's use an event as an example. It's usually a fairly good example. The sales team are absolutely adamant that the list of 345 people is the final, and that's it. No more contacts need to be added. You launch the campaign, and then half an hour later, they come back and say, oh, we have 50 more contacts that we need to add. Not surprising. Okay, so there's no need for you to have to deactivate the campaign. If you had selected this this second option to add members regularly, you could simply go to your segment, upload those additional contacts into the segment, and then within half an hour, those contacts will typically flow through into Eloqua, and then probably at a maximum of an hour later, they would then be sent the relevant communications from that campaign. So I tend to call one of these, I call the first one a static campaign or static segment, and the second one I would refer to as a dynamic segment. So static and dynamic. Now, there are some things that you need to know in relation to how this functions, but there are some warnings at the same time. For those of you that potentially watched sci-fi programs in the 1970s, you might remember these characters. But one thing that you really need to be careful of is, as I've just explained, if you do select the second option, that is the dynamic segment, Eloqua every hour or once a day, whatever the setting is that you've enabled, will go back to that segment and refresh and bring more people in. So the key thing here is don't run with a default end date on your campaign that Eloqua provides, which is 12 months. Because if, for all intents and purposes, you really need your campaign to run for 2 weeks, but in fact it's running for 12 months, then every day for 12 months, Eloqua will consistently refresh that particular campaign. So you need to be careful in relation to selecting that option and essentially making sure that it makes sense in the context of the end date that you provide on your campaign canvas. Let's have a closer look at understanding some of these things on the campaign canvas and trying to work out who's who in the zoo. So once you're looking at the campaign canvas as an example of an active campaign, you'll notice up in the top left-hand corner of the screen, it says active. So we know that everything's hunky-dory, it's all running away. Now in the middle of that canvas, can I just draw your attention to the number 600 that is sitting around the wait step there. What that means is that 600 people, well, let's be clear, 600 unique email addresses are currently sitting at that particular wait step, and according to the detail that you can see on the screen right there, they're waiting until 10 a.m. on the 23rd of January. This is actually the campaign canvas we use for the campaign for this particular user group, hence the date. So that's helpful. Now, who are those 600 people? Well, if you double-click directly on that number 600, so where that arrow is pointing, if you double-click on the 600, you'll get a pop-up window in Eloqua that looks exactly like this. And I want to draw your attention to using the scroll bar to scroll all the way over to the far right-hand side. Once you do that, I want you to draw your attention then to these 3 areas: status, entry time, and wait until. So each of these individual lines that you can see across the screen, these are individual people or individual unique email addresses, and it tells you what's happening. So it tells you that these people, for instance, they entered the step or on the canvas yesterday, The current status is we're awaiting action, and that action essentially is the wait step to expire, and that's what we've got down here on the right-hand side. And so at 9:59 a.m. on the 23rd of January 2018, that wait step will conclude and people will progress through that particular campaign. So let's take a closer look at some of those aspects and just be clear on how they function. So let's start first of all with the campaign, with the segment. If we double click on that, you can see the two options like so. And once you select the second, being the dynamic segment, you can then adjust the frequency. So here you can see hours, days, weeks, and months, and you can set that frequency to whatever you need it to be. Depending on the nature of the campaign, I find once a day is enough. You could do it every 2 days, 3 days. If you need to do it in hours, you could do it every hour or maybe every 3 hours. It really doesn't matter. It's all in the context of your particular campaign and what's going to deliver the best experience. Excuse me. Now, the wait step is important, as we talked about earlier, but again, it's a little bit like the segment in that you can wait for what I would call a duration of time. So you can wait for 5 days, 5 hours, 5 weeks, etc. Or you can wait until a specific date and time. Once you select the date and time option, you get a nice little pop-up menu, makes it nice and easy to select. And you also have time zone information available depending on where your particular campaign is running. Now, so you might be able to see, let me just zoom in a bit there for you. You can see there that my particular time zone defaults to Canberra, Melbourne, Sydney, which is home. I'm in Sydney. Now, if you find that your time zone doesn't default to where you are, that's simply a matter of asking your Eloqua administrator to assign your time zone to your user profile. As long as your user profile is set to your home time zone, then you'll generally not have to worry about changing the time zone because probably most of the campaigns you're running are in your time zone. However, if you're running multiple campaigns across different time zones, it probably doesn't really matter because you're probably constantly changing it anyway. But just so we're clear, the default that appears there for you as an Eloqua user is tied to your user profile. So your Eloqua administrator will be able to help you with that. Now, with the wait step enables you to wait, as I said, until a specific date and time or for a period of time. And then if you've also got a segment set to be dynamic, and let's say if I'm checking every 3 hours, that means that I'm checking every 3 hours, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week until the end of the campaign. So the next 3-hour interval could, for instance, fall at 2 a.m. in the morning. At 2 a.m. in the morning, that's fine, but you probably want to think through the experience. Do you want to be seen as a brand that is delivering emails at 2 a.m. in the morning? Now, depending on who you are and what you're selling, that may be completely fine. If you'd like to have a greater level of control over when the email is actually sent, let me show you how you do that. So that's done at the email element itself. So you click on that email, you get the little pop-up screen that you can see right here. So you will need to assign an actual email. So I'm just going to pick something here for random because I need to have an email assigned. And once I do that, the options here at the bottom of the screen become available to me. The one I want to look at to help with our scheduling is the scheduling tab. And so again, you'll see this is fairly self-explanatory. The tick box says only send during certain days and hours. And so what I can do here potentially, if I wanted to configure this to be a little bit more business hour oriented, I can do 9 to 5, and then I can select the days of the week that I might want that to go. So I can pick and choose just simply by highlighting those options below. So that's how I'm able to have control over the individual emails. So even if somebody enters the campaign at 2 a.m. on a Saturday, you can see here, based on the schedule that I've got down below, they won't actually be sent that email until 9 a.m. on the Monday, because the Monday is highlighted, as you can see here. So that's one way that you've got greater control over the experience that you're delivering. Now, there is another step available on the Campaign Canvas that you can use potentially in lieu of the wait step, and it's called an evaluation step. And what it does is We can look at the signature, etc. But let me show you where that sits. So it would look something like this. So we have our segment coming down. This is just an app doing a little bit of data cleansing. Email goes out. Then we go straight into the opened email step. What we need to do is look at these options at the bottom of the screen, and we need to define an evaluation period. And that's the evaluation period you can see here. Now, for the sake of the exercise, what I'm going to do is change it to 1 week. So it looks exactly the same. So the question we're asking is, has the person opened at least one time, that is opened the email at least one time, and I've got options there I can choose from, within the last 1 week, and for the evaluation period of 1 week. So what does this mean? What this means is, and you'll notice a little stopwatch appears on the right-hand side of the decision step. What this means is that the email is sent. It's sent immediately, or based on the schedule that we've assigned. And then we click here, or it arrives here at the opened email step. So what Eloqua is going to do is it does depend on the time frame you choose. It's either every 10 or 15 minutes, half an hour, or once an hour. And I think if we're looking at a week, it would be once an hour. So what Eloqua does is every hour, it asks the question, has the person opened the email? And it will continue to ask that question for the evaluation period of 1 week. So every hour for 1 week, Eloqua will ask the question, has this person opened the email at least once? Now, the difference here, in place of using the wait step, is that as soon as the answer is yes, so as soon as the response is positive, that person will then head off in this direction, and that will finish the campaign. Now, of course, that could take them off to all sorts of directions, but in this example, that would take them down to the end of the campaign. Now, if at the end of that evaluation period, being 1 week, if the answer is still no, then the person will move down here in the left-hand side of the screen, being in the negative direction, as you can see here. So that's the difference. So why would I use the evaluation period on a decision step in place of a wait step? Look, I think for newer users to Eloqua, the wait step is probably a little bit safer because we've got absolute clarity on exactly what's happening. Sometimes the evaluation period here can confuse people a little bit, so you need to get your head around it and understand exactly what it means, and you'll find more information in the Help Center to provide you with some support there. But essentially, the key difference I find with the evaluation step on the decisions is that you're able to engage with people as they're engaging with you. So if instead of waiting for a week and then asking the question, has the person opened the email, if you have other communications that follow, you can actually start to get those communications out to people as they're digesting that first decision step. And look, opened email is probably a little bit too a weak metric. You probably really want to start to look at things like clicked email, for instance. That probably would be a stronger option. You may want to ask if they've submitted a particular form, for instance. You could also see if they're in a shared list, and people can be in shared lists for various reasons. So some of these might be stronger metrics to gauge engagement versus in simply open, but fundamentally the same principle applies. You've got an evaluation period there available for a shared list, as you do for the click to email, etc. as well. So you've got options there, but that would help explain for you the difference between a wait step or potentially using the evaluation period as seen here on screen. So a few options to consider there. Okay, let's go back and have a look at our final point, which is the campaign entry and exit periods. So the key thing to remember here is that a contact can only enter, the contact will enter a campaign and they will exit the campaign at some stage. So we do that. Remember, if we go back, we looked at segments, we looked at from a form, we looked at those various social, LinkedIn and Facebook plugins or apps. They're all ways that people can come into a campaign, and at some point they would exit a campaign. So tied in very closely with this particular principle is the start and end date of the campaign that we've talked a little bit about today. And one of the most common mistakes I see customers make with their end date on a campaign is the assumption that once the end date of my campaign is reached, Eloqua no longer looks at any reporting. And that's not the case. Let me show you exactly what it looks like. So in this particular example, we can say that your campaign ran for 2 weeks, arguably the 1st of July, say to the 14th of July. However, the insight reporting, that is the reporting that Eloqua is gathering based on people's clicking and form submissions in the context of that particular campaign, will continue for 12 months following the end date. So just to be clear, for 12 months following the end date of the campaign. So from the 14th of July onwards for 12 months, Eloqua will continue to gather any engagement that takes place based on your particular campaign. So rest assured that that's not a problem. So again, it just reiterates the importance of making sure that when you set your end date, that the end date in fact reflects the reality of your particular campaign. That is not just simply some random date chosen by default 12 months out, that it in reality reflects the actual end date. So some of the things to consider in relation to your end dates and which date to select. If you're simply sending one email, that's pretty easy, right? Unless it's dynamic, if it's simply static, maybe the end date should really just be perhaps the day after you send it. Why the day after? Really, it's just about getting continuity throughout the team. If everybody's on the same page, then that will look a little bit easier from a reporting point of view, and just consistency is a good thing. So if you're sending multiple emails, though, you need to look carefully at the campaign canvas, looking at your wait periods. Are they waiting for a week or 2 weeks or 2 months, for instance, and making sure that that you, with a calendar, I find the easiest way to do this is I have a calendar up on one screen, my canvas on the other screen, and then I just literally start to go through the calendar and start to realize, okay, well, that particular campaign at the earliest should finish on this specific date. And so that's the date that I would nominate, making sure there's time for everybody to go through. The end date is also important, especially if you have an offer with an expiry date. So if you've got an offer to download something, or maybe a discount code, or something like that, you need to make sure that that information is not being delivered after the expiry date of that particular offer. So again, campaign start and end dates, very important process. Now, the last thing we wanted to show you today was to explore in a little bit of detail some of the updates that have happened. This is now a regular part of the user group that we'll do at the end of each session, and just trying to expose to you some of the new functions that are available within Eloqua. So this is the schedule that you can see on screen right now. It's broken into 2 areas, the actual platform itself being Oracle Eloqua Release 493, the other being apps, which is on the right-hand side, which is 18A. But let's have a close look at some of those differences or enhancements. The progress bar across the top of the screen has been cosmetically enhanced. It's a little bit clearer and more obvious, I think, which is a good thing. There's also a new dashboard, which shows you open by device. So you can look at a particular email and get some overall dashboard performance reports in relation to really what are people looking at when they open your emails. Are they on desktops? Are they on mobiles? Is it an iPhone, a Samsung, etc., etc.? You'll be able to see all of that. Also, some of those dashboard reports are also now available from within Insight. Something else that's been added that I personally think is kind of cute, makes sense to me, but that is when you're in segments, you have the ability to include and exclude people. The exclude is now highlighted in red. So for the more visual, which probably makes up 90% of marketers, the ability to see that in red may just help you see that a little bit clearer, which is a good thing. Let's have a close look at one of these new dashboards, though, the Open by Device Metrics dashboard. So this one is really, really helpful, but only shows information related to opened emails. So that's one thing to consider. Just simply having sent somebody an email, unless they open it, we're unable to get that information back into Eloqua. Pretty standard, I believe, right across all platforms. They all relate pretty much to opened emails. But let's have a look at what one of the reports looks like. So this is the actual dashboard here you can see on screen. And down the right-hand side, we can see mobile, tablet, desktop, and other highlighted like so, and the color coding that you see across. So date periods across the bottom, actual number of email opens up the right-hand side, the usual functions over here on the left. You can either choose from a default or you can select custom and then simply apply the custom and the details will change. So that's email open by device platform trend. The next one, okay, so the reason I wanted to show you this is the same report, by the way. If I just go back, when you're in Eloqua looking at the dashboards, you may or may not have noticed there's a little download icon right here at the top right-hand corner. If you click on that, Eloqua will just simply download that as a PNG file for you. And so that's what I've done here. That's the PNG file that enables you to drop that into a PowerPoint presentation if you need to do something for the CMO or for the wider team. It just makes it much easier to download those dashboards versus maybe just doing screenshots. They're all done PNG, all the same size, and you can drop them straight into a PowerPoint deck. So some of the other reports available here are also around mobile devices, etc. I'm trying to understand, and I've got a question in with Oracle, and I'll try and get a response to this one, as to what generic means in relation to mobile devices, because you can see it's very specific here, but I'm just not sure there are that many generic devices on the planet, unless I'm incredibly naive in relation to mobile phone hardware. But I'm kind of wondering, is that to do with desktop? And so it's just a big chunk of desktop. I appreciate it says mobile, but maybe that's what it means. I don't know. So once I do know, I'll be sure to get that information to you, so there's a bit more clarity there. The next one is looking at mail clients. Now this one is quite interesting in relation to who's doing what. So Safari would imply basically Apple, whether that's on the iPhone or iPad, for instance. That would be my understanding, or at least a cloud-based email client. Same with Firefox and IE. We know Microsoft now also have cloud-based beyond Hotmail, but Office 365 and those sorts of things are all browser-driven, etc., versus these are probably more desktop-oriented. So again, seeking more clarification on exactly what we're looking at, and once I get that information, I'll share that with you. Operating systems, we can see that obviously our friends at Microsoft have a chunk there, but interesting to see the iOS is pretty significant as well. As you go through there, I'm curious to see that the BlackBerry is a bit of a rounding error there, as is the Windows Phone. But those are the dashboard versions of those devices. You could also access the same data. It's presented differently, but the same data in the new Eloqua Business Intelligence or Oracle BI solution, which is the complementary part of Eloqua, or the new Insight, as we like to call it. But how do you find these dashboards? Simple. You access them from the dashboards area. You can see the menu there at the top right-hand corner of the screen. Once you do that, you can then scroll through, and you'll be able to access them, any of these particular, whether it's campaign, assets. If you scroll down, you'll see the device menu, etc. Something else just to keep in mind, not so much an update feature particularly, but if you might remember, if we go back to the Campaign Canvas, I mentioned to you that there's a range of reporting available directly from the canvas. And so that's available here. So from that slide out menu, you just toggle the little button that you can see there. You click on any of those, and then you can access some campaign analysis insight reports directly from the Campaign Canvas. Again, this is not new. This is really just to give you a bit of an idea as to, or a tip on how to access some of that information. And so that particular report that you can get from the Campaign Canvas covers all of the basics that really most modern marketers would want to look at, specifically looking at the unique values throughout the campaign, which can be quite helpful, and on screen. And you can also export that information. You'll see down the bottom there, there's some options to export that as well. Well, that wraps up our user group today. Look, we appreciate you making some time to join us. This is just a little bit about Marketing Cube and who we are. We're based in Sydney, Australia, and we've been doing Eloqua and helping Eloqua customers since around 2007. So the user group is a big part of what we do, and we appreciate the support of clients and guests who join us from time to time each month. So thanks so much for joining us. We look forward to seeing you next month as we explore further with the Oracle Marketing Cloud and with Eloqua. Thank you very much and have a great day.